Miguel Rodriguez stared at the clock on the wall of room 143, watching the second hand tick away the final minutes of Dr. Chen's advanced calculus class. His notebook lay open on his desk, pages filled with equations and hurried notes. Unlike his classmates who were packing up, Miguel was trying to understand where he'd gone wrong on the last quiz. At 17, Miguel was neither the star of the class nor at the bottom. He existed in that invisible middle, smart enough to be in advanced math but not exceptional enough to stand out. At least that's how Dr. Eleanor Chen saw him. Miguel could feel her disappointment whenever she handed back his quizzes with red marks scattered across the page. "Remember, your projects are due Monday," Dr. Chen announced, her voice cutting through the end-of-class chatter. "And don't forget we have a test on Wednesday covering everything from Chapter 7. The class groaned collectively. Dr. Chen was known throughout Westfield, high for her demanding curriculum and unforgiving tests. She had been teaching for 20 years and prided herself on maintaining high standards. Some students called her the Wall, because so many promising math students hit their limits in her class. Miguel slowly closed his notebook as the bell rang. He waited until most students left before approaching Dr. Chen's desk. "Excuse me, Dr. Chen. I was wondering if you could explain something about my quiz." She looked up from her computer, her expression neutral but somehow still intimidating. "Which problem, Miguel?" "Number 4, he said, opening his quiz to the page where he had attempted to solve a complex integration problem. "I thought I understood the concept, but—" Dr. Chen sighed, not unkindly but with an air of someone who had explained the same thing many times before. "Your approach is creative, I'll give you that. But in mathematics, especially at this level, we follow proven methods for a reason." Miguel nodded, trying not to show his frustration. What Dr. Chen called creative he saw as logical. His way made perfect sense to him, even if it didn't follow the textbook method. "Try to stick to the techniques we've covered in class," she continued. "Creativity is good, but mastery of fundamentals comes first." "Yes, ma'am," Miguel replied, tucking the quiz into his folder. As he walked out of the classroom, Miguel felt the familiar weight of disappointment settling on his shoulders. He had studied for hours for that quiz, staying up late into the night practicing problems until his eyes burned, yet his grades never seemed to reflect his effort or understanding. The hallway was crowded with students rushing to their next classes or heading home for the weekend. Miguel moved against the flow, heading to his locker. He spun the combination lock with practiced ease and exchanged his math textbook for his chemistry book. "How'd it go with the wall?" asked a voice beside him. Miguel turned to see his best friend Raj leaning against the neighboring locker. Raj was in the same calculus class but seemed to navigate Dr. Chen's tests with ease. "Same as always," Miguel shrugged. "She thinks I'm doing it wrong. Are you coming to study group tonight?" Raj asked. "We're meeting at the library at 7. Miguel shook his head. "Can't, my mom's working late and I need to watch my little sisters." The truth was Miguel studied better alone. The group sessions, while helpful for some, often moved too slowly for him or focused on memorizing formulas rather than understanding concepts. "Your loss," Raj said with a smile. "Lisa's bringing cookies." "Save me one," Miguel replied, closing his locker with a metallic clang. The walk home from Westfield High to the small apartment where Miguel lived with his mother and 2 younger sisters took exactly 22 minutes. He had timed it often enough to know. Today he took a detour through the park, adding another 8 minutes to his journey. He needed time to think. Miguel's relationship with mathematics was complicated. Numbers had always made sense to him in a way that words sometimes didn't. When he was younger, his grandfather, who had been a mathematics professor at a small university in Mexico, would give him puzzles and problems to solve during summer visits. Those were some of his happiest memories. Sitting on his grandfather's porch, working through equations while his grandfather watched with proud eyes. Mathematics is not about following rules, Miguelito, his grandfather would say. It is about seeing patterns where others see only chaos. After his grandfather passed away 3 years ago, Miguel had inherited his books, old worn textbooks with notes scribbled in the margins in his grandfather's neat handwriting. Miguel had read them all, absorbing his grandfather's alternative approaches to problem solving like a sponge. Maybe that was his problem. Dr. Chen wanted textbook solutions, but Miguel's mind worked differently. He saw shortcuts and connections that weren't in the curriculum. By the time Miguel reached the apartment building, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the parking lot. He climbed the stairs to the third floor, fishing his key from his backpack. The apartment was quiet and empty. His sisters would be at after-school programs for another hour, and his mother wouldn't be home from her job at the hospital until late evening. Miguel dropped his backpack on the kitchen table and opened the refrigerator. He poured himself a glass of orange juice and made a sandwich before settling down to start his homework. His mind, however, kept drifting back to Dr. Chen's class. Why couldn't she see that his methods worked? Sure, they weren't always the most straightforward, but they got to the right answer. Wasn't that what mattered? With a sigh, Miguel pulled out his calculus textbook and a worn notebook. Not his school notebook, but a special one with a blue cover. This was where he worked out problems his way, where he explored mathematical concepts without the constraints of classroom expectations. For the next hour, Miguel lost himself in equations. He worked through problem after problem from the textbook, then created his own variations, pushing the concepts further. In this private world of numbers and symbols, he didn't feel average or invisible. Here, he was confident, capable. The sound of keys in the door pulled him from his mathematical trance. His sisters, Anna and Lucia, burst into the apartment in a whirlwind of energy and chatter. "Miguel, guess what happened in art class today?" Anna, who was 10, barely paused for breath as she launched into a detailed story about a clay sculpture disaster. "And then Ms. Patel said it was actually better than what I planned," she finished triumphantly. "That's great," Miguel said, closing his notebook. "How about you, Lucia? How was your day?" Lucia, at 8 years old, was more reserved than her sister. "It was okay. We had a spelling test. Did you do well?" Miguel asked, already knowing the answer. Lucia always did well on tests. She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Are you guys hungry? I can make spaghetti for dinner." While the girls changed out of their school clothes, Miguel filled a pot with water and set it on the stove. Cooking dinner for his sisters was a routine he had fallen into naturally after their father left 5 years ago. His mother worked long hours as a nurse to support them, often taking extra shifts. Miguel didn't mind stepping up to help. Family took care of family. As the water began to boil, Miguel's thoughts returned to mathematics and Dr. Chen's class. A test was coming up on Wednesday, covering some of the most challenging material yet. Despite his struggles with quizzes, Miguel usually did better on tests when he didn't freeze up. Test anxiety was his worst enemy. No matter how well he understood the material, sometimes his mind would go blank when faced with an exam paper. His palms would sweat, his heart would race, and the equations he knew by heart would suddenly seem like hieroglyphics. After dinner was cleaned up and his sisters were settled with their homework, Miguel returned to his blue notebook. He flipped through pages of equations and notes until he found a blank spot. Then he began to write, not equations this time, but a plan. For the next test, he would try something different. Instead of cramming the night before and working himself into a state of anxiety, he would spread his studying out over the weekend. He would focus on understanding the underlying principles rather than memorizing formulas. And most importantly, he would trust his instincts, his natural way of seeing mathematics. Maybe Dr. Chen would never appreciate his methods, but Miguel was determined to prove to himself at least that his approach was valid. He wasn't just an average student who couldn't quite measure up. He was Miguel Rodriguez, grandson of Professor Rafael Rodriguez, and he had his own way of making sense of the mathematical universe. As the night grew late and the sounds of the city outside his window faded to a gentle hum, Miguel closed his notebook with a new sense of purpose. Wednesday's test wouldn't just be another evaluation. It would be an opportunity to show what he was truly capable of. Little did he know that an even greater opportunity was waiting just around the corner, one that would change not only Dr. Chen's perception of him, but also his perception of himself. Monday morning arrived, with gray skies and a light drizzle that tapped against the classroom windows of room 143. Miguel sat at his desk, his completed project neatly tucked inside a folder on his desk. He had spent most of the weekend working on it, taking breaks only to help his sisters with their homework and to cook meals when his mother was at work. Around him, his classmates were frantically reviewing their own projects, making last-minute adjustments or, in some cases, trying to finish what they should have completed days ago. Miguel watched as Raj scribbled furiously in his notebook, erasing and rewriting a particularly difficult section. Did you finish? Miguel asked, leaning over. Raj looked up, his eyes bloodshot from what was clearly an all-nighter. Barely. I got stuck on the third problem. You? Miguel nodded. Yeah, I finished Saturday. Raj raised an eyebrow. Show off, he said, but there was no malice in his voice. Was it as hard as everyone says? Before Miguel could answer, Dr. Chen walked into the room, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. The class fell silent immediately. Dr. Chen had that effect on people. She commanded respect without having to ask for it. Projects on my desk. Please, she announced, setting her leather briefcase down beside her chair. Then open your textbooks to page 217. We're going to review for Wednesday's test. There was a shuffling of papers as students brought their projects forward. Miguel waited until most of the class had gone up before taking his own folder to the front. As he placed it on the growing stack, Dr. Chen glanced up from her computer. I trust you followed the standard approach this time, Mr. Rodriguez, she asked, her voice neutral but her eyes sharp. I tried to stick to the methods we learned in class, Miguel replied, which wasn't exactly a lie. He had used the classroom methods where they made sense but had reverted to his own techniques when he felt they were more efficient. Dr. Chen held his gaze for a moment longer before turning back to her computer. We'll see, she said simply. Miguel returned to his seat, feeling a mix of defiance and uncertainty. He knew his solutions were correct, he had checked them multiple times, but he also knew that Dr. Chen valued process as much as results. All right, everyone, let's begin our review, Dr. Chen said, standing up and moving to the whiteboard. The test on Wednesday will cover integration techniques from Chapter 7, with a particular focus on integration by parts and partial fractions. She began writing equations on the board, explaining each step with practiced precision. Miguel followed along, taking notes but also making small annotations in the margins of his notebook. Connections to concepts they had learned earlier in the year, alternative approaches that made more sense to him. Remember, Dr. Chen continued, these techniques are the foundation for more advanced calculus. Master them now and what comes next will be much easier to grasp. Miguel wondered if that was true for everyone. For him, some of the advanced concepts came more naturally than the basics. It was like his brain was wired to see the big picture first, the details second. The review session continued for the rest of the period, with Dr. Chen working through example problems and calling on students to provide the next steps. When she called on Miguel, he gave the correct answer but hesitated when she asked him to explain his reasoning. I saw that the function could be split into two parts, he began, knowing that his intuitive understanding was hard to put into words. And then what? Dr. Chen prompted, her pen poised over the whiteboard. Then I applied the formula for integration by parts, Miguel said, even though that wasn't exactly what he had done in his head. He had seen a pattern, a relationship between the parts of the equation that made the solution obvious to him. Dr. Chen nodded, seemingly satisfied with his response, and continued writing on the board. Miguel slumped back in his seat, feeling like he had just told a small lie. But how could he explain that he sometimes saw mathematics differently than how it was taught? The bell rang, signaling the end of class. As students began packing up their things, Dr. Chen raised her voice over the noise. Before you go, I want to remind you that tomorrow we'll be doing something a little different. I have a special problem I'd like to present to the class. Something to stretch your understanding beyond what we've covered, so far a murmur of curiosity and anxiety rippled through the room. Nothing to worry about, Dr. Chen assured them, though her slight smile suggested otherwise. Think of it as a preview of what awaits those of you who continue with mathematics in college. As the class filed out, Miguel found himself intrigued rather than worried. A challenge beyond the curriculum? That sounded more interesting than intimidating. What do you think she's going to spring on us? Raj asked as they walked together toward their lockers. Miguel shrugged. No idea, but I'm kind of looking forward to it. Raj laughed. Only you would look forward to Dr. Chen making our lives more difficult. I'm just trying to survive until graduation. It's not about survival, Miguel said, surprising himself with the passion in his voice. It's about understanding how things work, seeing the patterns behind everything. Okay, Professor, Raj teased, elbowing him gently. Save it for your TED Talk. Miguel smiled, but inside he was thinking about what Dr. Chen might have in store for them. Whatever it was, he was determined to approach it with an open mind and maybe, just maybe, It would be a chance to show that his way of thinking had value too. The rest of Monday passed in a blur of classes, homework, and household chores. That night, instead of diving into more practice problems for the upcoming test, Miguel found himself drawn to one of his grandfather's old books, a worn copy of Advanced Topics in Mathematical Analysis. It wasn't part of his high school curriculum, not by a long shot, but something about Dr. Chen's mention of a special problem made him want to explore beyond the boundaries of what they were learning in class. He flipped through the pages, stopping occasionally to study an equation or theorem that caught his eye. Some of it was beyond his current understanding, but not as much as might be expected for a high school student. Thanks to his grandfather's guidance and his own curiosity, Miguel had been exploring college-level mathematics for years, though never in a formal setting. As midnight approached, Miguel finally closed the book and got ready for bed. His mind was still buzzing with equations and possibilities, making sleep elusive. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of numbers and symbols dancing across a vast blackboard, forming patterns that shifted and evolved like living things. Tuesday morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to Monday's gloom. Miguel arrived at school early, using the extra time to review his notes from the previous day. As he sat in the quiet classroom, he felt a sense of anticipation building. What was this special problem Dr. Chen had mentioned? As his classmates began to arrive, the room filled with the usual morning chatter, discussions about homework, complaints about other classes, plans for the weekend. Miguel remained at his desk, half listening to the conversations around him while continuing to flip through his notes. Dr. Chen arrived precisely as the bell rang, as she always did. She set her briefcase down and surveyed the class with a keen eye, waiting for the noise to subside. "Good morning," she began once the room was quiet. "Before we continue our review for tomorrow's test, I'd like to present the special problem I mentioned yesterday." She turned to the whiteboard and began writing, her hand moving quickly and confidently across the surface. As the equation took shape, a hush fell over the classroom. Even from the first few symbols, it was clear that this was unlike anything they had seen before in class. Dr. Chen stepped back from the board, revealing a complex differential equation that sprawled across nearly half the whiteboard. It contained elements of what they had been studying, but combined in ways that made the whole seem far greater and more intimidating than the sum of its parts. "This," she said with a hint of pride in her voice, "is what I call the impossible problem. It combines concepts from differential equations, advanced calculus, and even touches on some elements of complex analysis." Miguel stared at the equation, his heart beating faster. It was beautiful in its complexity, a mathematical tapestry woven with threads of various concepts, and strangely parts of it looked familiar, reminiscent of problems he had explored in his grandfather's books. "Now, I don't expect any of you to solve this completely," Dr. Chen continued, her voice cutting through Miguel's thoughts. "In fact, this problem has stumped even some of my graduate students at the university where I teach evening classes. But I'd like you all to attempt it, to see how far you can get. Consider it good practice for thinking outside the box." She handed out worksheets with the problem printed on it, along with space for work and a final answer. "You'll have 30 minutes. Do your best and don't be discouraged if you find it challenging. That's the point." The classroom fell silent as students bent over their worksheets, pencils in hand. Some stared at the problem with furrowed brows, clearly unsure where to begin. Others began writing tentatively, trying to apply the techniques they had learned. Miguel looked at the equation on his paper, then back at the board. There was something about it, something that tickled the edges of his memory. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the symbols float in his mind, rearranging themselves, revealing connections. And then it hit him. The structure of this equation was similar to a class of problems his grandfather had shown him during their last summer together. The approach wasn't anything they had covered in class. It involved a transformation technique that simplified what looked like an impossibly complex problem into something much more manageable. Miguel's pencil moved across the paper, not starting at the beginning as most would, but rather rearranging the equation into a different form. He applied the transformation, watching as the unwieldy beast of an equation became something he could work with. From there, it was just a matter of applying the integration techniques they had learned in class, though in a sequence that probably wasn't obvious to most. As his classmates struggled with the initial steps, Miguel was already halfway to the solution. His hand moved quickly, confidently, the numbers and symbols flowing from his pencil as if he were simply transcribing something he had memorized, rather than solving a problem he had never seen before. Dr. Chen walked around the room, peering over students' shoulders. Miguel was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice when she paused behind him, her eyes widening slightly as she observed his unorthodox approach. By the time 20 minutes had passed, most students had filled only a small portion of their worksheets, many with crossed-out work and signs of frustration. Miguel, on the other hand, was reviewing his final answer, double-checking his work to ensure he hadn't made any careless errors. 10 more minutes, Dr. Chen announced, returning to the front of the classroom. Miguel looked up, then back at his completed solution. Should he turn it in now? Would Dr. Chen think he had cheated somehow? He hesitated, pencil hovering over his paper as he deliberated. In the end, curiosity won out over caution. He wanted to know if his approach was valid, if his answer was correct. He gathered his worksheet and walked to Dr. Chen's desk. "Finished already, Mr. Rodriguez?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted he had made much progress. "Yes, Dr. Chen," Miguel replied, handing her his worksheet. "I think I solved it." Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly, but she took the paper without comment. Miguel returned to his seat, aware of the curious glances from his classmates. As he sat down, he saw Dr. Chen studying his work, her expression changing from skepticism to surprise to what might have been a hint of disbelief. For the remaining minutes of the allotted time, Miguel sat quietly watching as Dr. Chen continued to examine his solution. She picked up a red pen and Miguel's heart sank. Was she about to mark it as incorrect? But instead of marking his paper, she began working through the problem herself on a separate sheet, occasionally glancing back at his work. "Time's up," she announced finally, looking up from her desk. "Please bring your worksheets forward, completed or not." There was a shuffling of papers as students brought their work to the front. Many looked defeated, some resigned, a few cautiously proud of the partial progress they had made. Once all the papers were collected, Dr. Chen stood before the class, Miguel's worksheet in her hand. "Before we move on with our review, I want to address something unexpected that has just occurred," she said, her voice carrying a note that Miguel couldn't quite identify. "It seems that one of you has managed to solve the impossible problem completely and correctly." A murmur of surprise rippled through the classroom. All heads turned, scanning for who might have accomplished this feat. "Miguel Rodriguez," Dr. Chen said, holding up his worksheet, "has found a solution using a transformation approach that, I admit, I hadn't considered for this particular problem." All eyes turned to Miguel, who felt his face growing hot under the sudden attention. "How did you know to approach it that way?" Dr. Chen asked, her tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. I've seen similar problems before," Miguel stammered. "My grandfather showed me." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "Well, it seems your grandfather taught you well. This is graduate-level work, Mr. Rodriguez. I'm impressed." The bell rang, saving Miguel from having to respond. As students began to file out, many cast curious or admiring glances his way. Raj clapped him on the shoulder as he passed. "Dude, what just happened?" he whispered. "Did you actually solve the wall's impossible problem?" Miguel nodded, still somewhat in shock himself. "I guess I did. Meet me at lunch." "You have to tell me how you did it," Raj said before heading out the door. As Miguel gathered his things, he noticed Dr. Chen watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It wasn't the usual look of mild disappointment or indifference. There was something else there, interest perhaps, or reassessment. "Miguel," she called as he was about to leave. "Could you stay for a moment?" Miguel's heart skipped a beat. Was she going to accuse him of cheating after all? He approached her desk, trying to keep his expression neutral. "Yes, Dr. Chen?" "I'm curious," she said, looking at him intently. "Have you been holding back in my class all this time? Or did you just have a moment of inspiration with this particular problem?" Miguel hesitated, unsure how to answer. Finally, he decided on honesty. "I think differently about math sometimes. Not the way it's taught in class. I try to do it the way we're supposed to, but it doesn't always make sense to me to follow every step when I can see a shorter path." Dr. Chen studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I see. Well, Mr. Rodriguez, it seems we have a lot to discuss. Would you be willing to meet after school today? I'd like to understand more about your approach to mathematics." Miguel nodded, surprised but also intrigued. Yes, I can do that. Good, Dr. Chen said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I think it's time we had a proper conversation about your potential. As Miguel left the classroom, he felt as if something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since entering Dr. Chen's class, he had been seen, truly seen, for what he was capable of. And whatever happened in their meeting after school, he knew that things would never be quite the same again. Little did he know just how significant that change would be. Not just for him, but for Dr. Chen as well. The lunchroom buzzed with the usual midday chaos, students laughing, trays clattering, the hum of dozens of conversations happening at once. Miguel made his way through the crowd, balancing his lunch tray as he searched for Raj. He spotted him at their usual table near the windows, already halfway through his sandwich. There he is, Raj called out as Miguel approached. The math genius who cracked the wall's impossible problem. Miguel slid into his seat, glancing around nervously. Keep it down, will you? It's not that big a deal. Not that big a deal? Raj's eyes widened in disbelief. Dude, nobody solves Dr. Chen's challenges. That's why they call her the wall. But you just walked right through it like it wasn't even there. Miguel poked at his mashed potatoes with his fork. I just happened to recognize the type of problem, that's all. From where? We've never seen anything like that in class. My grandfather, Miguel said simply. He used to be a math professor in Mexico. He taught me a lot during summer visits. Raj leaned forward, lowering his voice. So what happened after class? I saw Dr. Chen asked you to stay behind. She wants to meet after school today, Miguel replied, taking a bite of his sandwich. She said she wants to talk about my potential or something. Whoa, Raj said, impressed. The wall wants a private meeting with you? That's like being summoned by the Queen. Miguel laughed, though there was a nervous edge to it. I'm not sure if it's a good thing or not. Maybe she thinks I cheated. Did you? Of course not, Miguel said, perhaps a bit too loudly. A few heads turned in their direction and he lowered his voice. I'd never cheat. Then you've got nothing to worry about, Raj said confidently. And hey, maybe she'll finally see that you've been holding back all this time. Had he been holding back? Miguel wasn't sure. It wasn't that he deliberately hid his abilities. It was more that he had learned to keep his unconventional methods to himself after years of teachers, telling him to show his work the standard way, and the rest of the school day crawled by with excruciating slowness. In English, Miguel found himself reading the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing any of it. In history, he doodled equations in the margins of his notebook instead of taking notes on the Civil War. By the time his last class ended, his stomach was in knots as the final bell rang. Miguel texted his mother to let her know he'd be home late. He made his way through the rapidly emptying hallways back to room 143. The door was ajar, and he could see Dr. Chen at her desk, grading papers with her trademark red pen. He knocked softly on the door frame. Dr. Chen looked up, her expression unreadable behind her reading glasses. Ah, Miguel, come in please and close the door behind you. Miguel did as she asked, suddenly feeling like he was walking into a job interview rather than a meeting with his calculus teacher. He stood awkwardly by the door until Dr. Chen gestured to the desk directly in front of hers. Have a seat, she said, removing her glasses and setting them on top of the stack of papers. I appreciate you staying after school. No problem, Miguel replied, sliding into the seat. His hands felt sweaty and he wiped them discreetly on his jeans. Dr. Chen studied him for a moment, her gaze direct but not unkind. I've been teaching for 20 years, Miguel. I've had thousands of students pass through my classroom. Some were naturally gifted at mathematics, others worked hard to master the concepts, and many struggled, despite their best efforts. She paused, folding her hands on the desk. But I've rarely encountered a student who approaches problems the way you did today. Your solution was elegant, unconventional but elegant. Miguel blinked in surprise. This was not what he had expected. Thank you, he said cautiously. I have a question for you, Dr. Chen continued. And I want you to answer honestly, without worry about what you think I want to hear. Can you do that? Miguel nodded, his heart beating a little faster. Why have you been hiding your mathematical abilities in my class? The directness of the question caught Miguel off guard. I haven't been hiding anything, he stammered. Not intentionally, anyway. Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. It's just, Miguel hesitated, trying to find the right words. My way of solving problems doesn't always match what's in the textbook. When I try to do it the way we're taught, I get confused and make mistakes. But when I do it my way, it makes sense to me. And what is your way exactly? Dr. Chen asked, leaning forward slightly. Miguel took a deep breath. I see patterns, connections between different parts of an equation. Sometimes I can just tell what the answer should be and I work backward to prove it. Other times I transform the problem into something simpler before solving it. Like you did today, Dr. Chen said, nodding slowly. Yes. When I saw your problem on the board, it reminded me of a class of differential equations my grandfather showed me. He taught me a transformation technique that makes them easier to solve. Your grandfather, Dr. Chen repeated. You mentioned him in class. He was a mathematics professor? At the University of Mexico City, Miguel confirmed. He retired about 10 years ago and he passed away 3 years ago. But before that, he used to teach me during summer visits. He gave me all his old textbooks. I see. Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. And these books, have you read them? Miguel nodded. Most of them. Some parts are still too advanced for me, but I understand more every time I go back to them. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something. Then she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a notebook. Miguel's blue notebook, the one where he worked out problems his own way. You left this in class yesterday, she said, placing it on the desk between them. I found it after everyone had gone. I must admit, I looked through it. Miguel felt his face grow hot. That notebook contained his most private thoughts about mathematics, his explorations and experiments, his unconventional approaches. It was like a diary of his mathematical mind. I'm sorry for the invasion of privacy, Dr. Chen said, seeming to sense his discomfort. But what I found inside was remarkable. You've been working on concepts well beyond the high school curriculum. Some of these approaches, they're quite innovative. Miguel didn't know what to say. He had expected to be reprimanded, not praised. May I ask why you never showed any of this work in class? Why you've been content to receive B's and C's when you're clearly capable of much more? Miguel looked down at his hands. I tried at first, but in middle school my teachers always marked me down for not following the right steps, even when I got the correct answer. They said I needed to show my work the proper way. After a while, I just started keeping my real work separate from my schoolwork. And the test anxiety? Dr. Chen asked. Miguel looked up surprised. How did you know about that? It's fairly obvious, Dr. Chen replied. Your homework and projects show a much deeper understanding than your quizzes and tests. Classic sign of test anxiety. Plus, I've been teaching long enough to recognize the symptoms, the way you freeze up sometimes when called on in class. Even though I can tell you know the answer. Miguel nodded, a lump forming in his throat. It got really bad last year. I failed a big exam even though I knew the material cold. Since then, it's like my brain just shuts down sometimes when there's pressure. Dr. Chen tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the desk. Well, that's something we can work on. There are techniques that can help with test anxiety. We? Miguel repeated, confused. Yes, we, Dr. Chen said with a small smile. Miguel, I don't think you realize how unusual your mathematical intuition is. What you showed today and what I see in this notebook suggest you have a gift that should be nurtured, not hidden away. She slid the blue notebook back toward him. I'd like to propose something if you're interested. Miguel took the notebook, his fingers tracing the worn cover. What kind of something? Private sessions once or twice a week after school. I can introduce you to more advanced concepts, help you develop your natural abilities in a more structured way. And in return, perhaps you can help some of your struggling classmates see mathematics from a different perspective. Miguel stared at her, not quite believing what he was hearing. You want to teach me extra math and have me help tutor other students? Precisely, Dr. Chen nodded. I think it would benefit everyone involved, but especially you. With the right guidance, I believe you could excel in ways you haven't even imagined. But what about class? Will I still have to solve problems the textbook way? Dr. Chen's smile widened slightly. Let's make a deal. In class, you'll continue to learn the standard approaches. They're important foundations that you'll need later. But I won't penalize you for using alternative methods as long as you can explain your reasoning clearly. And on tests, I'll allow you extra time if needed to help with the anxiety. It sounded too good to be true. Miguel had spent years hiding his true mathematical self, and now his teacher, the intimidating Dr. Chen, of all people, was offering to help him develop it. Why? He asked finally. Why would you do this for me? Dr. Chen's expression grew serious. Because talent like yours is rare, Miguel. And because I've been teaching long enough to know that sometimes the most brilliant minds are the ones that don't fit neatly into the standard curriculum. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant for a moment. When I was in college, I had a professor who recognized something in me that others had missed. He took the time to mentor me, to challenge me beyond what was expected. Without him, I wouldn't be the mathematician I am today. Her eyes refocused on Miguel. Sometimes all it takes is one person to see your potential. Today you showed me yours. Now I'm offering to help you reach it. Miguel felt a warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling that was part pride, part relief, and part something he couldn't quite name. For so long he had felt like an outsider in the world of mathematics, someone who could see its beauty but wasn't allowed to engage with it on his own terms. "I'd like that," he said finally, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. "I'd like that a lot." "Excellent," Dr. Chen said, her professional demeanor returning. "We'll start next week after the test. Speaking of which," she glanced at the clock on the wall, "you should probably head home and continue your preparation. Even mathematical prodigies need to review the basics." Miguel stood up, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. "Thank you, Dr. Chen, for seeing me, I guess. You're welcome, Miguel. But remember, I didn't create your talent. I merely recognized what was already there. The real work begins now." As Miguel walked to the door, Dr. Chen called after him. "Oh, and Miguel? Bring that blue notebook to our sessions. I think we'll find it quite useful." Miguel nodded, clutching the notebook a little tighter as he left the classroom. The hallways were nearly empty now, the afternoon sunlight slanting through the windows and casting long shadows across the floor. As he walked toward the exit, his steps felt lighter than they had in years. For the first time since his grandfather died, Miguel felt like someone truly understood his relationship with mathematics, the joy he found in its patterns, the thrill of discovering connections that others missed. Dr. Chen had seen past his average grades and quiet demeanor to the mathematical mind that lay beneath, and she had offered him something he had never expected to find at Westfield High. Recognition, validation, a path forward that honored his unique way of thinking rather than trying to force it into a standardized mold. As Miguel pushed open the heavy door and stepped outside into the warm afternoon, he couldn't help smiling. Tomorrow's test no longer seemed like an obstacle to overcome, but rather an opportunity to demonstrate what he could really do when freed from the constraints he had placed on himself. The equation that had changed everything, Dr. Chen's impossible problem, still lingered in his mind, its elegant structure a reminder that mathematics, at its heart, was about finding patterns in chaos. Today, in solving that equation, Miguel had also begun to find his place in the world. And as he walked home under the canopy of spring leaves, he realized something else. Sometimes the hardest problems to solve weren't on paper. Sometimes they were inside us, waiting for someone to see the pattern, to recognize the transformation needed to turn complexity into clarity.